not too worried about Jeff Koons being mentioned at this conference. It's happened quite a few times, and it shall continue. Thank you, Al. Our next speaker is Julio Reyes, who's an artist whose work depicts intimate dramas, moments of unnoticed grandeur, souls grappling with modern life, and a compassionate vision of what it is to tread alone in the increasingly unsympathetic modern age. He earned his BFA in painting and drawing with a minor in sculpture at the Laguna College of Art and Design. Julio lives and works with his wife, the artist Candice Bohannon, in the mountains of Northern California. Welcome.
I just want to start by thanking Michael Pierce and Michael Lynn Adams, two wonderful people that I had the opportunity to actually meet for the first time coming here, and invited me to do this, and these great gentlemen to be on this panel with, and all of you for great conversations and for being here and making this a real event. I'm nervous as hell. Never done anything like this, and all these guys were so eloquent. So I'm definitely fishing for sympathy here.
You got it.
Yeah.
Say what you want to say.
Yeah. Well, let me just start by saying I didn't plan this, but I'm kind of going from the cuff here. But one of the most powerful experiences I had in my life growing up was having a very intimate relationship with my grandmother. And what I mean by that is when I was a kid, I was asked to interview somebody over 70 for like some school project, and it was to kind of get a little glimpse of what the world was like outside of our own. So I interviewed my grandmother, and I sat her down. I had my little tape recorder, and it was for the first time I heard stories that I had never heard before. And she told me that when she was 13 years old, I'm sorry, she was kidnapped out in the deserts of Arizona and the borderlands next to Mexico and the United States. And she was kidnapped by a gentleman and raped, and she bore him 3 children. And that it was a hard life, and they were pig farmers. And it was the days of bootleggers and witch doctors. In Spanish you call them curanderas. And the way she told me these stories was without rancor. A very kind of trustworthy, factual telling of what life really was like, and all of the little details would come through in all her mannerisms and the way she shaped her words. And she would get really close to you like this, and her eyes would kind of pierce into you. And I remember just being spellbound. I mean, it was story time, and it was like the best storyteller ever. And she lived right downstairs from us at the time, and it was wonderful. It was wonderful to hear that. And I think at that moment it set a tradition for me, and that was to try to recreate this feeling and try to figure out what it was that drew me so much to an experience like this. So I would go to her all the time, and I'd ask her more stories, and it became like a running joke that Julio was going to find the oldest person in the room and go sit down with them and ask them about their life. And I think what it was is that she truly was able to embody a real experience for me and represent it in a way where I was entering into that world along with her. And it didn't feel like fantasy, it felt real, but there was so much of her in the story, and that didn't negate from the hard facts that she was telling me. It only brought them to life, and it put her in juxtaposition to this very, very difficult context that she came up in. I mean, to imagine a little girl against unsurmountable odds, I mean, to be 13 years old and have 3 children in the desert, and to have no rancor about it, but just to say that was life, and it was difficult. I think it left an indelible mark, and that was to find the real person and the real experience behind things. That the two were connected, that the way she was talking, the grooves on her face and the wrinkles on her hand, her temperament. She was very rough around the edges, and she was notorious for being a real hard ass. And so the two were connected. They were bound up together. And who she was, and her memories, and her experiences, and the way she was telling the story, the words she was choosing, the pace of her speech, that the two were very connected. So it really influenced a lot of the subject matter that I pursue. But I think I always held on to that. And the more I was exposed to different kinds of thought in the art world, the more I always came back to that. That a thing can be very theoretical, or a thing can be very formalist. but usually there is a connection between the two that you want to bound up together and really consecrate into an action that carries that, the particular, the universal. Like I said, I'm nervous. I'm going to drink a little water because my mouth's drying up. That's better. All right. So anyhow, so I grew up with this lady, and I grew up with more stories like this. My family context was Mexican American, and they came to this country, and where they came from, it was rough life. My mother showed me where she lived when I was a kid, and it was shacks like the kind you might see in Brazil. And for her, the United States was a place where, I don't know, miracles could happen, really. There was this appreciation of things that worked, as opposed to the disorder and chaos. She was almost kidnapped 3 times when she was a little girl as well. As opposed to a world of chaos and poverty and death. There was no playing games with life for her. She didn't gravitate towards ideas that kind of bewildered you or glorified in the grotesque, because those things were connected to real things for her. They were not theoretical, rhetorical devices or motifs that just kind of floated in space. It would actually physically make her sick to see things like this. But I think what I got was her appreciation for things that were kind of harmonized, creating a unity, I think, of your ideas, your thoughts, and that your actions should kind of embody those. And so I guess with that kind of upbringing and that kind of surrounding with these kinds of stories, I have concluded that we are in a shattered age. And what I mean by that is there are forces like relativism and nihilism, critical theory, tearing apart our ideas and our ideals that have been handed down to us from the past. For better or worse, what it has done is has created a void. And I think that we are still in the wake of this. And when I talk to people out there at this conference, and we have conversations and some of the other panel discussions or papers that I've heard read, I think there's a commonality. And what I feel from all of them is that there is something that we're pining for, something that we want to see of ourselves in the world that has some meaning, that has some value to it, that maybe has a sense of continuity with our surroundings and maybe even the past, that we could possibly transmit to the future, hopefully, that's of value to them. And I think that, you know, listening to these guys and other ideas like Roger Scruton's talk on Kitsch, I think that was phenomenal. You know, I think that these are things that we have to watch out for. They're barriers to really communing with reality itself and to tapping into those real people and real stories and real experience. Lawson touched on this on one of his discussions about how the pace of moving through a landscape physically, not virtually through a computer or a photograph, will actually affect your perception. And so this whole idea of working on your mental scales, your powers of perception, and the ability to kind of look at things and value them in a certain way that is not irrespective of actual events, of actual people, not abstracting them, but somehow uniting them. Dr. Havlicek mentioned Hegel, and there's a particular idea that he uses, this begriff, you know, to pull together the raw material of not only life, but of your experiences, but of your ideas, and of your heart, your feelings, and take the subjective and the objective, pull them together, all your experiences of life, your sense of community, your sense of your craft, your sense of the themes that draw you. And if you work on those and you pull them all up to a very high level, where it's not kitsch, and you're not being sarcastic or playing games with people, trying to dupe them into something, then I think you have a chunk of reality that is of value. I think Michael Pierce was talking about the subject. I think he was touching on some ideas that I think make mention that subjectivism doesn't have to lead to relativism. That we all have our own perspective on reality. It might not be the complete story because it's like a mountain. You know, it has many different silhouettes and you can walk around it, but it's there. And so how do we connect that to our feelings about it? How do we reconcile the two? And so ultimately this connection is something that matters to me for artists, because I think what it does is it brings up a moral question. And the question is that right now, more than ever, it's difficult to be an artist because there's so much temptation. I think galleries want you to do something, your audience wants you to do something, all of us are constantly marketed to on our phones, like almost virtual now, and real life, real people that actually smell when they walk around for a little while and cry and have emotions are now things that we kind of sparsely see. We're becoming uncomfortable with reality. So I think it creates this sense of the surreal. I absolutely do. I know that there's movements out there that want to capture that and kind of rearrange it and throw it back at you. But I think one of the things that matters to me most is not just to throw back at you as a byproduct of this kind of surreal feeling, but to compose it and to make sense of it so that it's actually a reflection. What's the term? I don't know, to have an understanding and to give it meaning, right? So that somehow you can enter into this and have an experience and be connected to something that's of value to you, as opposed to a spectacle, which you sit back and you're entertained by and you rarely ever enter into. And I think a lot of the marketing techniques and like I said, the information age has kind of been like a steroid to this, where now it's just like all the time, just nonstop, bum, 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 bum. And you do have a nomadic existence as a result of it, because you hardly ever enter into anything and stay there for a while. These things are just flying before your very eyes, and we get very comfortable just sitting back and not using this, our imagination. I remember a quote from N.C. Wyeth that really moved me, and it was in the biography, somebody's biography in the family, and they were, of course I'm paraphrasing, but he took the kids to watch a movie when the first flickers, I guess, were coming out. And he told them all to turn around and look at the people's mouths agape, you know, with the light on them. And he said, what they're not using is this, their imagination, because the motion picture is doing all the work for them. So how do you capture that awe? How do you get somebody to use their imagination? I think representational artists are in a great place to be able to do that, because we have an object that doesn't move. We have to complete a lot of the sentences along with the artist. We have to spend time with it and sit with it. I think one of the worst ways to absorb and digest art is this kind of quick fluttering about that our modern world kind of presents us with. To be able to sit with something and to enter into it, almost ritualistically, I think changes you. But I think when you enter into a work, there's only something there if the artist did the same thing with his own experience. If he entered into something, not self-aware, not exploiting it so much, but really just gave himself to experiences. To live life and not be sitting there like taking every photo of yourself while you're living life. Like, oh man, I mean, to just really let yourself be a part of, I've heard this term before, the sea of being. You know, creation, everything that exists and is real, that has an objective and a subjective existence, a body, a mind, a spirit. We're not floating minds. We're not just floating bodies. I would never walk up to a real person, or let's say my depiction of my grandmother is not just mechanical, like, and formalistic, like, explain love to me, Julio. It's a parted mouth, and it's a dilated eye, and it's a slightly tilted head. Like that, I think sometimes we can approach figures like that as painters. And what I want to see is fantastic form, the ability to use the depiction of human beings, but in a way that connects you to something that is real about that person, that you feel it. Because I think, in the long run, from the artwork that I absolutely love, like someone like Andrew Wyeth and Rembrandt, is that you feel the soul, not only in the sitter, in the subject of the painting, but you also feel the soul at work in the artist. And I think what predisposes great art is a great person.